'Twas the night before Christmas, and deep in the house, a creature was stirring, ready to pounce. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, whilst phantom footsteps ascended the stair. The children were nestled, all snug in their beds, but a dark shadow figure loomed over their heads. And Mama in her kerchief, and I in my cap, were about to be woken by one ghostly rap.
Hi, I'm Lil.
And I'm Fitz.
And you're listening to a very Christmassy episode of Knock Once for Yes.
At least for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere, the warmth of summer is no more than a pleasant memory as cold winds, rain, sleet, and hopefully even a little snow falls from dark skies onto bare trees. The nights have drawn as close as they can, and so too, it is said, have the spirits of those who have passed. To drive back the cold and dark, we bundle up in blankets in front of the fire and maintain the tradition of sharing ghost stories by candlelight. So whether you celebrate Christmas, Hanukkah, Winter Solstice, Kwanzaa, Saturnalia, Yule, any of the other winter festivals, or even none at all, we'd like to welcome you to join us by the fireside and enjoy a Merry Creepmas. I must warn you though that the best seats have probably already been taken by the cats. So Lil, what have we got coming up on this episode?
Well, we will sail the seven seas and find buried bones on this paranormal radar. We have listener letters to share and true ghostly encounters from Tracey, Andrew, and Kaylee. We bring you a rather royal Christmas paranormal postcard. And of course, it wouldn't be Christmas without our slightly dodgy Christmas quiz.
I'm sure everybody's been waiting all year for that.
So what have you got for me first on the paranormal radar?
Well, some of you may be aware that earlier in the year there was an interesting news story doing the rounds about Amanda Teague from Northern Ireland and her husband Jack. We didn't cover it at the time, but I'll put a link in the show notes on the website to the original story. Amanda, a 46-year-old female Jack Sparrow impersonator, and I can see you're loving this already, fed up with corporeal men, fell in love with the ghost of a Haitian pirate from the 1700s.
Well, why not?
Indeed. Wanting more than a casual relationship, they, and if you can't tell from my tone of voice, they was very much in air quotes, made arrangements to be married, which included travelling to international waters where the union would be legal, and I've no idea how that works, and also ensuring the presence of a medium through which the groom might say, I do.
Yeah, so that would be some very one-sided vows going on otherwise.
Well, that was the whole point of the medium. Sadly though, the course of true love never did run smooth, and Amanda has now declared on social media that their marriage is over. She doesn't go into details, so we've no idea what caused the split at the moment, but she does say that she'll explain all in due course, and I'm sure we're all waiting with bated breath to see how this drama unfolds next time there's a slow news day. It does make me wonder though, how on earth they're going to divide their assets.
Their assets presumably being multiple Jack Sparrow outfits.
In this case, I wouldn't want to make any assumptions. Thanks to Jan for sharing the article on our Facebook group, and if you find an interesting paranormal story on the internet or in your local paper, do share it with us as we may well wish to feature it on the paranormal radar. Our second story takes us to New York, where ghost hunters unearthed the skeleton of a man missing since 1961. Mike Carroll of Long Island sought out ghost hunters and psychics to help solve the disappearance of his father George, who was last seen leaving the house in 1961 to buy cigarettes. On visiting the house, psychics felt an energy in the basement. Taking action on the psychic's revelation, Mike and his two sons dug up the concrete floor of the basement and found human remains, which officials have now confirmed is the body of Mike's father George. Unfortunately, any potential suspects or witnesses to George's murder are no longer alive, but Mike is at least happy to be able to bury his father and have some closure. As usual, we'll put links to the article on the website where you can check it out for yourselves.
Well, my first reaction to that is what a terribly sad story. But as you say, at least Mike now has some closure and he can move on from this mystery because it must have been haunting him for so many years.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's what drove him to get the psychics in the first place. But I mean, it was something that interested me because of the psychics. And as we know, I'm a bit of a skeptic and I'm not sort of entirely convinced about psychics. But it was very interesting that they came in, said, I'm getting something from the basement, dug it up, and there he was.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you there. I mean, there really is no wiffly-waffly woo in this case. It's pretty black and white. They came in, said where the body was, and it was there.
Indeed. Again, it's not sort of convinced me, but it's just another one of those things that's just like, there may be something to this.
The evidence is adding up underneath your little skeptic's hat.
I'm keeping it all tidied away. Now, I'm sure you're all dying to crack on with the Christmas quiz, but before we do that, last episode we were talking about Vardogas. If you don't know what Vardogas are, they're effectively a sort of preemptive doppelganger. They're basically like the sounds or actions of somebody arriving before they actually arrive. If you want a bit more detail, then do listen to last episode, but we had an email from one of our listeners, Annie, about her own Vardoga experience. She says, "This concept of Vardogas has happened to me. I've heard my husband come home, open and close the door. The house shook as the door closed. I called out, but he didn't answer. Going to check, I found that he'd not come home. This has happened multiple times, and my daughter was home on one occasion and witnessed it. Strangely, this happened frequently for a period of time and hasn't happened now for quite a while."
I have been absolutely astonished at the amount of people that have come forward to say that they've had this Vardoga experience as well. I had no idea so many people experienced it. And the stories that are coming in are all so similar to what I've experienced. And Annie was saying about how it happened frequently for a period and then stopped. It is exactly the same at our house.
Yeah,
it happened over and over again, like for a very short period of time, and then nothing. It's so weird.
So strange. So if anyone else has had a Vardoga experience, let us know.
Please do.
We also asked if you had any Christmas stories, and you didn't let us down. This first one is from Celia.
On what turned out to be my grandpa's last Christmas, we all got him this train clock. He likes trains. If you physically pressed a button on the clock, the train would ride around the tracks and say something like, "All aboard!" My grandpa ended up passing away 2 months after Christmas. Cut to next Christmas, and we're back at my grandma's house. We're sitting around talking about my grandpa and how much we miss him. I went upstairs to go to the bathroom and suddenly felt kind of creeped out. I still hate to say that I felt creeped out because I had a fantastic relationship with my grandpa. I also had never experienced anything paranormal at all in my life, and definitely never felt creeped out upstairs at my grandma's before. So I went to the bathroom, and when I came out, I saw a figure go into my grandma's bedroom out of the corner of my eye. I entered the room, but found no one in there. I was completely freaked out and sprinted downstairs. I was a kid at the time, and I definitely wasn't putting any of this together. I was about to tell my family what had just happened, and my grandma's dog started barking like crazy at the train clock we got my grandpa. She kept barking at it, and suddenly the clock turned on and the train ran around the track. We all sat there in silence for a minute, and then my grandma said, "We love you too, Bucky." Bucky was her nickname for him. I have tears in my eyes writing this. It was a truly crazy experience. Besides that, I've never really had anything paranormal happen to me. A few years back, I told this story to a friend, and when I went to bed that night, I had a dream of Grandpa saying, "Thanks for remembering me. I'm sure it was just a coincidence of a dream, but I like to think that Grandpa and I are always going to be connected on a different level.
And thank you to Celia for getting in touch with that story.
I think that's just brilliant. I love that. He obviously just popped in to say hi, it's Christmas, hey, don't forget about me. And of course, have a little play with his train. I think that's so sweet.
And the heartwarming stories don't stop there. We've had another one from Mel from Florida. She says, my grandmother had a tradition of getting everyone lottery tickets at Christmas and hanging them on the tree. I'm not much of a gambler, but she loved it, so it was just for fun. The year she passed, my aunt sought to uphold the tradition and once again bought scratch-off lottery tickets for everyone, including one extra in honour of my late grandmother. Christmas Eve, we all scratched our tickets and won the usual amount, very little. Then it was time to scratch my grandmother's ticket. One of my uncles did the honour, and after he revealed his meagre winnings, the power went out and then immediately came back on. We all had a good laugh. I guess my grandmother was pleased.
What a lovely idea. I love that though. They're maintaining the tradition of her gift giving by having the tickets and buying one for her too. That is just lovely. And I would have thought that the grandmother was not so pleased with her meagre winnings by turning the power on and off. But that's again another case of, I think the grandmother just popped by to say hi and join them at Christmas, which to me makes perfect sense that if you're going to have spirit visitors in your house, of course they're going to nip by for Christmas.
Indeed, and hopefully this year she'll get you the winning ticket.
Yeah, that would be pretty good.
Well, it's time now for the first question in our Christmas quiz.
Christmas quiz. Are you ready? Who's going to go first?
Have you got yours ready?
I have.
Would you like to go first?
Yeah. Well, so listeners, if you haven't joined us for a Christmas quiz before, what we'll do is we will read the questions, put our questions to each other. Then we will have a listener story while you think about the answers. And then after the story, we will give each other the answers. Right, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, I think this is quite an easy one to start with, to ease you in gently. Tell me the correct museum for each of the following haunted objects. Right?
Okay.
Robert the Doll, Annabelle, Billy the Idol, and Peggy the Doll.
Okie dokie.
And if you get really stuck, I can give you a hint and I can give you the list of museums and you can then try and match them. But you will lose points, of course, if you do that.
Okay. I thought that most of them were in the same place, so...
Nope.
Okay. So I'm going to do badly on this one. Okie dokie. Well, I'm going to ask you my question now.
Okay.
And I'm on a bit of a theme. As you will see, I know you've been brushing up on your Scandinavian folklore recently.
Mm-hmm.
And that is where I went in search of some amusing Christmas-themed quiz questions.
Okay.
So, we learned last year about the Scandinavian tradition of the Yule goat.
Yes.
In Gävle, Sweden, they build a huge straw goat in the town square as part of their traditional Christmas celebrations and have done since 1966. I've recently learned that there is another, somewhat illegal tradition in Gävle relating to the goat. Do you know what it is?
Oh my goodness. I dread to think. No, I don't. Oh no.
I'm looking forward to telling you this one. It's brilliant.
Okay, I don't think I've got a hope at guessing, but I look forward very much to finding out the answer.
Well, that's good. I think I'm going to be on an even footing with you on this one because, like I said, I thought they were all in the same place on yours, so I'm obviously going to get this one wrong.
Shall we have a story?
Let's. Our first story comes from Tracey, who was listening to a previous episode and heard about one of my odd experiences and was reminded of something strange that had happened to her.
In the late 1980s, I was a graduate student in Washington, D.C. One hot summer night, I was all alone in my apartment working on a paper. It had been really, really hot, triple digits Fahrenheit, in the 40s Celsius, so I'd turned off all the lights, except for one desk lamp and my roommate's PC clone. It was approaching midnight and my roommates were out clubbing. I was working away on my paper when I heard the deadbolt on the front door shoot back and the door open. I called out absent-mindedly, Then I heard footsteps going along the hallway to the kitchen. The fridge opened, then the water ran in the sink, which I would expect because it was so horribly hot. I called out again. I heard my roommate start to jog down the hall. At this point, I figured it was the woman whose computer I was borrowing, because she was very playful. I kept typing, but prepared myself for her to pop into the room yelling, "Boo!" Her desk was set up facing the open door and the hallway beyond. As the footsteps drew level with the door, I looked up expecting to see my roomie. Instead, I saw transparent bare feet from the ankle down and about 1 foot off the floor race past the door. I shrieked and shot back, knocking over the chair, fetching up sitting on the radiator across the room. After my heart stopped knocking about in my chest, I went around and turned on every light in the place. My roommates turned up about 45 minutes later. The thing was, once I'd calmed down, I noticed that the apartment felt fine. Nothing spooky, but it rarely ever felt spooky there. In fact, the place felt empty, but welcoming and positive. The apartment was probably about 100 years old when I lived there. It still had the original gas lamp fittings, although they were disconnected. The building is still standing, but I don't think it's been rehabbed. Of all the things I could imagine, I can't figure out why I would conjure up naked running feet. But that's what I saw.
Thank you, Tracey, for getting in touch with that story. Yes, the first thing that comes to mind is the thing that I saw at my mum's, which was her legs walking down the stairs. Although hers were level with the stairs, it wasn't like they were floating above them. So
but
that's
still disembodied legs,
yeah,
which is
it's
the weird part.
I can't understand any reason why you might just see disembodied legs. But something has recently occurred to me.
Oh?
We've been talking about Vardogas.
Yes.
The unlocking and the door and everything before they came home.
Oh, yeah.
This could be another Vardoga story.
It could. I mean, like you say, the arrival home, the noise of the door opening and the tap running and all that fits perfectly with the Vardoga concept. But the thing that gets me is the feet were running a foot above the floor. And
that's
that
strange.
Doesn't make sense. I mean, it makes sense more in a residual haunt where you've got something. I mean, she mentions that the apartment's 100 years old, although she didn't think it had been rehabbed, so it seems unlikely the floor level had changed.
Yeah, I don't know what the environment around Washington, it's Washington DC, isn't it? I don't know what the environment around there is like. I know there's a lot of old houses, especially if you think of somewhere like Venice, where they slowly sink over the years because they're on sort of marshy or wet land.
Yeah, there's that. I think the thing that I found interesting as well is you hear a lot of, this isn't to get at skeptics, but one of the biggest skeptic arguments about ghosts and ghost sightings is that it's just your mind seeing what you expect to see. And she makes a really good point at the end there that applies to quite a lot of sightings actually, and this one is a perfect example of that. This isn't something that you would expect to see.
No.
Of all the things your brain, because your eyesight and your brain does fill in gaps in your eyesight, and it can conjure up things, that are familiar to you. But this isn't something familiar. This isn't something that you would expect to see.
No, if it's going to fill in, it'll fill in the whole person rather than a bit floating above the floor. That's not what you expect to see.
No.
If you see that, you don't go, it happens every day.
Yeah.
You think, my word, that is somewhat odd.
Exactly.
I'd also be interested to know if anyone else has seen sort of partial people or an apparition.
Partial people.
Yeah.
It's a new term.
Yes, especially whilst walking along the path of weird.
Yes, follow the path of weird.
Right, I bet you are all dying to know the answers to our Christmas quiz questions and do score along at home.
If you can figure out how to score these, but we won't worry too much about that.
Okay, so remind me of your question again.
So the question was, give me the correct museum for each of the following haunted objects, which were Robert the Doll, Annabelle, Billy the Idol, and Peggy the Doll.
Okay, so Billy the Idol will be Greg and Dana's travelling paranormal museum thing.
Yes, it is quite a long title. Listeners may well know about Billy the Idol because we have talked to him about him on the Paranormal Radar before. He resides with Greg and Dana Newkirk and their travelling museum of the paranormal and occult. Billy is a carved wooden African idol, originally deposited under a house in Ohio, bound in a burlap sack, which sounds quite sinister. He evoked in his new owners a sense of dread and caused terrible nightmares, leading them to believe he was cursed and earning him the nickname Idol of Nightmares. When he was donated to the Newkirk's museum, the curators began to experience all manner of inexplicable phenomena, including capturing EVPs that sounded like guttural screaming.
Ugh.
However, after a lot of time and work with Billy, the Newkirks have found the idol to be very communicative and quite the character. He's very popular with fans of the museum, who often bring and even mail him gifts, and the Newkirks have started to take the idol with them on location to help with their paranormal investigations.
Okay, so remind me what I've got left now.
Okay, so that leaves you with Robert the Doll,
Yeah,
Annabelle,
yeah.
and Peggy the Doll. A lot of dolls.
Okay, Annabelle, I believe, is in the Warrens.
Yes, I'm sure that the possessed Raggedy Ann doll Annabelle needs no further introduction or explanation. This was the easy one. She is, of course, at the Warrens Occult Museum.
Okie dokie, the other two, I'm not even sure I remember Peggy at all. And I thought the other one was on loan to Zach Bagan's museum.
Oh, you've got them the wrong way round. So,
Ah.
Peggy the doll, I'm pretty certain, is now in the possession of Zach Bagans and his Haunted Museum, as he acquired her from her original English owner, Jane Harris. But I say fairly certain because the claim for this doll is that even looking at a picture of her online can have fatal consequences. So I really can't say I lingered too long on my research for this question.
That's probably lucky.
Yeah. So that leaves you with Robert the doll.
Well, I thought Robert was on loan to Zach, so...
He has appeared on his show, but Robert the Doll is actually on permanent display at the Fort East Martello Museum in Key West, Florida. Robert is pretty well known in the paranormal world, easily recognisable with his little boy sailor suit and unsettling beady eyes. He originally belonged to eccentric artist Robert Eugene Otto, who, some would say, had a rather unhealthy relationship with the doll growing up. He would carry the doll everywhere, sit him at the dinner table, sleep with him, have conversations with him. His parents would hear conversation in the child's bedroom being spoken in two entirely different voices. The doll even took his first name, Robert, while the boy went by his second name, Gene. Although many children become attached to their favourite toys, Gene started blaming the doll for his own misbehaviours, saying, "It wasn't me, Robert did it." Some of these occurrences included Gene waking his parents up in the middle of the night with his screaming, only for them to find his bedroom in chaos with upturned furniture everywhere. Still, things started getting yet more creepy when Gene didn't grow out of the doll as he got older. And it was only when he married that Robert was relegated to a turret room of his Victorian mansion. However, local kids would swear that when they walked by the house, the doll would appear in different windows throughout the day, as though Robert was moving about the room by himself.
Eek.
I know, right?
I must say, when you were talking about he only got rid of the doll, well, not got rid of the doll, but was
Sequestered
less
the
attached.
doll.
Yeah, when he got married, I'm thinking the Victorian mansion may have been the selling point for his...
His wife.
Yeah.
Eventually, Gene and his wife passed away, but Robert remained locked in the attic room, and the new tenants of the house soon began to report odd occurrences. They would hear a child's giggling and footsteps coming from the attic. Some people reported that Robert had moved on his own, or that they'd seen his expression change. Eventually, the activity became too much, and Robert was donated to the museum in which he now resides, where he receives frequent visitors, presents of sweets, and almost daily letters, often letters of apology from visitors who have disrespected him and suffered the consequences.
Okay, so what did I get? 2 points?
2 out of 4.
Okay, well, I'm going to turn my question into a two-parter now to give you the option of getting some more points.
Okay.
So, Yevli goat, every year at Christmas, that's the tradition. There's another illegal tradition relating to the goat. Can you guess what it is?
I just have no clue. I really don't.
Okay, burning it down.
Oh.
Okay.
Oh no, I knew that's so unfair. I knew that, and I thought that's the tradition the first tradition you meant.
No. The tradition is to put up the goat at Christmas. The illegal tradition is to burn it down.
That's illegal, but I thought that was like the whole part of the tradition was the burning of the Yule goat. Oh, no. I can't believe I got that wrong when I actually knew it.
You so could have got that one. Okay, so for a bonus point then, do you know how many times, or can you guess how many times since 1966 it survived?
Oh, okay. Do I get a point for being vaguely in the ballpark? Because otherwise I'm already lost this quiz.
I'll give you a point if you get within 5.
Okay. 1. No.
Oh, sorry. It was 12.
12. That's quite impressive.
Yeah. Settle down for this because it is absolutely brilliant.
Okay.
Since 1966, the goat has burned down or otherwise been destroyed almost every year. The very first year, it was burned down on the 31st of December. It survived the following 2 years, but was again burned down on the 31st of December in 1969. In 1970, it was burned down by 2 drunk teenagers just 6 hours after being constructed.
Oh no!
From 1971 to 1978, it was smashed apart, collapsed, stolen, burned, collapsed again, hit by a car, burned down and kicked to pieces.
What?
In 1979, the goat was burned down before it was even finished, and a second one was created and fireproofed, which was subsequently broken to pieces. In 1980, it made it to Christmas Eve before being burned down, and in 1981, a miracle, it survived.
Hooray, the year I was born.
In 82, fire again. 83, only the legs were destroyed, and in 84, it was completely torched again. Now remember, this is completely illegal, and people risked fines and even jail time if they were caught. So in 1985, they erected a 2-metre high metal fence which was guarded by private security and soldiers from the local infantry regiment. It burned down.
How?
86, fire again. 87, it was doused in fire retardant chemicals and burned down. In 1988, an English bookie accepted bets on the survival of the Yevli goat, and I'm guessing a few people made a few bob. As another miracle, it survived. In 89, they built 2, both were burnt. In 1990, a team of volunteers guarded the goat and it survived. 91, burnt down. 92, 2 were built, both were burnt down on the same night. 93, it was guarded by taxis and the Swedish Home Guard. One or both of them must have been effective, as that year it survived as it did the following year. In 95, fire again, and a Norwegian was arrested for burning it down. In 96, they set up webcams and the goat survived, and in 97, it narrowly avoided destruction after having fireworks launched at it. From 1998 to 2001, it was burned down each time, with a visiting American being arrested for the last one after being told by local friends it was a Christmas tradition and he wouldn't get into trouble.
Oh no!
Mm-hmm.
That's terrible.
Yep. In 2002, the goat was guarded by a local radio personality. Now, sadly, I don't have much information on this, but a 22-year-old from Stockholm tried to set the goat on fire and failed. And I've got an amusing image in my head of a pair of Viking warriors battling over the fate of a straw goat. The next 3 years, it was destroyed by fire again, and I promise I'm not making this up. In 2005, 2 men dressed as Santa and a gingerbread man shot a fire arrow into it, and they appeared later that week on Swedish TV's Most Wanted.
In their costumes.
Yeah.
In their costumes. The gingerbread man was the Most Wanted poster.
Yep. In 2006, it survived, but the next 3 years it succumbed to arson. In 2010, someone tried to bribe one of the guards, but apparently this was unsuccessful as the goat survived. In 2011, they sprayed the goat with water to freeze into a protective shell of ice. It burned down, as it did in 2012. In 2013, it was soaked in flame retardant and burned down. Despite 3 attempts in 2014, it survived. In 2015, a drunk 26-year-old was arrested fleeing the scene with a singed face, smelling of petrol and holding a lighter. It didn't take long for this mastermind to crack under interrogation, admitting that it was, in retrospect, a bad idea. In 2016, it was burned down again on its inauguration day and wasn't replaced. And last year, security was again stepped up with a second fence being added in addition to security cameras and guards, and it appears that this was enough to deter even the most ambitious arsonists as no attempts were made. This year, as far as I'm aware at the time of recording, it is still unburned, but there's a live webcam that you can look at to see it.
I'm really intrigued to know how they managed to get past the army, but not a group of local volunteers.
Or taxis.
Or set fire to something that was encased in ice.
Exactly. The one that really sticks out for me is Santa and the gingerbread man firing fire arrows at it.
Does sound like something out of a Disney film.
It does. We're not condoning arson.
No, please.
Don't
Anybody listening to this, I don't care how much of an ancient tradition it is not okay to go around setting fire to straw goats.
No, in this case, you could end up being fined or going to prison. Do not do so.
But it does sound like an episode of Stupidest Criminals.
It does sound like an episode of The World's Stupidest Criminals. Anyway, 2 points I think I got. I don't think you got any points on that one. I'm sorry.
Well, do I get like half a point for knowing the answer even though I didn't know the answer?
Oh, I don't know how generous I feel. I'll give you half a point for knowing after I told you the answer. Bear that in mind for future questions that I get stuck on.
I will bear that in mind. So my next question, before we go to another listener story, is the paranormal world, including us, went a bit mad for Netflix's adaptation of The Haunting of Hill House this year. But where is the real Hill House?
I'm going to ask you for half a point on this one, I think.
And what's your question, sir?
Okay, staying on the Scandinavian theme, there was a mythical giantess that lived in the mountains of Iceland. Much like the Germanic Krampus, she did not bring good fortune to naughty children. I'll give you 1 point if you can tell me her name, a bonus point if you can tell me what she did with the naughty children, and yet another bonus point if you can tell me what the current form of the tradition is.
Oh, that's a lot of potential bonus points that I'm not going to get. Well, I hope you're all scoring along at home and have a think on those 2 questions while Fitz reads us this next story from Andrew, a cowboy in white.
The 1970s in Texas. What a great time and place to be a teenager. The music, the clothes, and the partying. One of our favourite things to do at the time, to get away from the parents, was camping. There is a large lake west of Fort Worth called Possum Kingdom Lake. You've got to love the names that Texans come up with. The lake is very deep and has a massive dam that lets out water once in a while. When it does, it's quite a sight. The lazy river comes alive. We found out a day they were releasing water and planned a trip to camp below the spillway and watch the rushing water the next morning. My buddy Brad and I arrived a little later than we would have liked, hiked up the river in the dark about half a mile from the dam and set up camp. The river was on one side and tall cliffs on the other, a natural canyon. Like most teenagers at the time, the evening was spent with a fire, beer, and other substances. Eventually, the sleeping bags cooled and we both settled down to sleep. I was anticipating seeing the water release the next morning. I awoke looking up to a beautiful sunrise cresting yellow through the trees. Once I oriented myself, I was startled by the very loud sound of rushing water. Jumping out of my sleeping bag, I walked over to the steep bank to see water had risen almost to our campsite. Brad was still sleeping. I started to notice that everything felt a bit strange. The colours too vivid, the air thick. The air felt electric. It wasn't an unpleasant feeling, just unusual. Taking everything in, I looked up to the cliffs towering 150 feet above our campsite. The cliffs were lit with the bright yellow of the early morning sun. It was astoundingly beautiful. I was in awe of the surroundings. As I scanned the cliffs, right above me, a man on a horse walked up to the edge of the cliff. Not too strange, right? You are in Texas. But the man was dressed from head to toe in white. White cowboy hat all the way down to his boots, and I kid you not, the horse was white too. I was shocked at the sight. He didn't look at me, just stared into the distance. I woke Brad to make sure I wasn't dreaming, and he saw the same thing. The horseman stayed on the cliff edge for several minutes, both of us never taking our eyes off him. The rider eventually pulled back and was gone. We were baffled but excited at the sight. It seemed so out of place. After some coffee, we climbed up to the top of the cliff. We figured that maybe there was a horse event somewhere nearby that the rider could have ridden in from. Upon arriving at the spot on the cliff where we saw the rider, we looked for horseshoe tracks. We found absolutely nothing. There was no sign of anything. Scanning the area, you could see at least a mile. Again, nothing. This is state parkland. There are no homes for miles, and it's 6:30 in the morning. We made our way back to the campsite, confused, but feeling very lucky to have been given the opportunity to see such an amazing sight. If you ever find yourself below the dam at Possum Kingdom Lake, look along the cliffs. A white horse and rider may be looking back.
And thank you to Andrew for sharing another fantastic story with us. I get so excited when I see we've got a story in from Andrew.
Yeah, it's the way he wrote it. It definitely feels very dreamy, but obviously it wasn't. They were there and they climbed the cliff and what have you, but it just sort of comes across as
that otherworldly state.
Yeah, exactly. Otherworldly. That's a good word for it. I like it.
And I like he described the fact that the air felt electric, which is something that we've experienced ourselves.
Yeah, quite a lot. Definitely putting Possum Kingdom, is it Possum Kingdom Lake?
That's going on the list.
Yes, I'm putting that on the list of places we must visit.
I think everywhere Andrew's mentioned has gone on the list.
Yeah.
He makes it sound so beautiful.
And so, back to the quiz. Remind me of your question again.
So my question was, where is the real Hill House from The Haunting of Hill House?
I don't know. I know it was based on a book. I didn't know it was based on a real place, so...
Well, to be fair, it's kind of a trick question. It's not, the book itself isn't based on a real place. According to the biography of Shirley Jackson, author of the original book, she was inspired by several different, appropriately spooky locations. Likely amongst them was the Winchester Mystery House, unsurprisingly. And she was also inspired by reports written by psychical researchers investigating real haunted locations. So while technically there's no real Hill House from the book, there are two very real historic buildings that became Hill House during the filming of the recent Netflix adaptation and the first movie adaptation from 1963, simply titled The Haunting. And by the way, I refuse to get into the 90s movie adaptation because, quite frankly, it was so atrocious, it doesn't even deserve a mention. So we'll just stick with the two good ones. So have you any idea where these locations may be?
No.
I actually thought you'd know this one. Okay, so you could have gone for the most recent, the Netflix adaptation, The Haunting of Hill House, which was filmed at Beeshaw Manor in LaGrange, Georgia, in the US. Or at least the exterior shots were. So the image of the house with the porch and the flashing light, that's the manor. It isn't an old house. In fact, it was only built between 1997 and 2002. Although apparently a 1920s house stood on the site before this, and some of the materials from this home went into the building of the new manor. The owners who bought the manor in 2013, before it was used for the filming, seemed to think that this might have contributed to the odd experiences they had whilst living there. That's right, the house where they filmed A Haunted House was actually a haunted house.
Jolly good.
Apparently, the owners reported hearing loud music playing from the basement when no one was down there, and no equipment to even play music on. Strange smells would waft through the house, such as the scent of tobacco, even though nobody smoked, and objects would disappear and mysteriously reappear weeks later. They eventually moved, but the haunting appeared to move with them, and they once again began to experience unexplained events, such as battery-operated candles that had no batteries in them, inexplicably lighting up every night at the stroke of midnight. One report claimed that the manor wasn't just built with some leftover materials from the 1920s, but that one room from the original building was left intact and incorporated into the new house, and that apparently this room was the epicenter of paranormal activity. It's a very romantic notion, but I've got to imagine that trying to build one room into a new house has got to be a complete nightmare of a building project, has it not?
Yeah, it depends on how it's done, but I don't fancy it.
No. Unfortunately, you can't visit it anymore. Bishaw Manor was used as a wedding venue at the time, but has since been sold back into private ownership and has reverted to its original 1920s name of Alta Vista.
So now I know.
Well, of course, you could also have gone for the location of the 1963 movie The Haunting, during which the exterior shots of Hill House were filmed at Ettington Park, not far from Stratford-upon-Avon in Warwickshire, England. The manor of Ettington has apparently belonged to the same family since at least the recording of the Doomsday Book, right up to the present day. That's pretty impressive. Of course, the building standing today, which is currently a hotel, is much more modern than that. There is a record of a house on the estate in the 13th century, but this was demolished in 1641 and replaced with a smaller house. From then on, this building was added to extensively, with renovations and additions in an extensive 19th century remodelling, all but rebuilding the place, and giving it the romantic neo-Gothic style we see today, with its steep roofline, turrets, arched windows and doorways, and the distinctive yellow limestone and redder ironstone giving it an almost striped appearance. Looking at it, you would be surprised if it wasn't haunted, and apparently it's been named by some as the most haunted hotel in Britain. Possibly its use as a nursing home in the 1930s, or that of a prisoner of war camp during World War II, have contributed to the hauntings, but apparently over 15 ghosts are said to reside within its walls. Reports include the apparition of a lady in Victorian clothing, who seems so real, guests have thought her to be a reenactor. No less than 2 separate white lady ghosts, one of whom is seen gliding through the corridors late at night, the other sitting on the veranda. The apparitions of 2 boys and that of an army officer have been seen since a terrible accident in the 1800s, during which the 2 boys drowned, as did the army officer who was attempting to rescue them. Of course, it wouldn't be a British haunting without a good old spooky monk, and indeed, the ghost of a monk has been witnessed inside and outside the hotel. Several people have seen the phantom of a man and his dog walking across the reception area and into the library before vanishing. And one Christmas Eve, shocked staff saw a candle lift up off the mantelpiece and float away by itself.
Now, you're certainly facing stiff competition to be called the most haunted anything in the UK,
Well,
so
yes.
they've done well there. But my excuse is I've never seen the film, so that's why I haven't got a clue on the second one.
No, but when we have seen it, it's not that far from us. I think we maybe ought to pay a little visit.
We'll put it on the list.
So remind me of your question again.
Okay, so my question was the mythical giantess that lives in the mountains of Iceland. If you can tell me her name, you'll get a point. You can get a bonus point for letting me know what she did with naughty children and another bonus point if you can tell me what the current form of the tradition is.
I've got an idea that I've read her name somewhere, and it was something like Joltunda or something along those. Is it even vaguely close?
I think I'll give you half a point because I think that's her husband.
Tell me her name and her husband's name.
Her name is Grilla. I can't remember what her husband's name is. It's full of unpronounceable Scandinavian letters.
That's probably why it didn't stick in my head completely, because I couldn't sort of say it in my mind, as it were. As for the naughty children, this might be another myth that I'm getting mixed up, but does she collect them in a big sack?
No, I think that's Krampus.
No, I'm not doing very well. Go on, tell me.
She eats them.
Oh, no!
Her favourite meal is naughty children's stew.
Oh, well, that's going to put you off being naughty for the whole year, isn't it?
Indeed.
And the current tradition... no, I'm not even going to try.
Okay, I'll give you a bit of a rundown. The earliest description of Grilla is found in the Sverris saga, written in the 1100s, where it's explained that her name means bugbear. She has the ability to detect naughty children, and during Christmas time she descends from her mountain home to search the nearby towns for them, as they are her favourite snack. As I said, she's believed to have an insatiable appetite for naughty child stew, the ingredients to which apparently are never in short supply. It would appear that frightening children at Christmas went a bit out of fashion, as a decree was passed in 1746 prohibiting the practice. The legend was amended in many cases to include the death of Grilla. The canny Scandinavians were, however, clever enough to keep something in reserve, as it's now said that if there are enough naughty children, Grilla will return from the dead with an even more ferocious appetite.
I'm not sure that's made it much better. I mean, it's very much along the lines of, like the Grimm's fairy tales. I mean, the original ones really were very grim. There was a lot of children getting eaten in those as well. And they've all sort of been tamed down for obvious reasons. But I'm not sure their tamer version is really that much tamer.
I think it's less a tame version and more a kind of, we're going to comply with the law, but it's like, Grilla's dead, but if you're naughty, she can come back to life.
It makes Elf on the Shelf seem very tame.
Okay, so neither of us scored anything on that round.
No, I'm not even sure where we've got to with the scoring. I think we might have got like a quarter of a point each or something. Dear listeners, I hope you're scoring better at home than we are.
No, I got 2 on the first one.
Oh, well, I've got my next one lined up. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
You might know this one, actually.
Okay.
This year seems to have been rife with weather chaos. And one of these events, Hurricane Florence, sparked the re-emergence of a legendary ghost. Can you tell me what it was?
I'll come back to you on that.
Okay. And what's your question to me?
Okie dokie. We're staying with Grilla. Our new giantess friend had a pet. I'll give you 1 point if you can tell me what it was, and another bonus point if you can tell me what it did at Christmas time.
Oh, crikey. I'll need to think. Let's have a story in the meantime.
That sounds like a plan, and this one is from Kaylee.
In May of this year, my mother had come over to my apartment for dinner and drinks. We were both in the kitchen tending to our dinner and laughing hysterically at absolutely nothing like we always do, when out of the blue, my doorbell rang. We both silenced immediately and looked at each other in shock, because we weren't expecting any other company. And when I moved into the apartment, I was advised that the doorbell did not work. I went downstairs to the front door, expecting to see someone standing there. But of course, there was no one. I was a little creeped out about this, but I quickly went back upstairs and started dinner again. Not even 2 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. Now, too scared to go back down to the front door due to watching too many horror movies, and totally convinced I would be met with a knife-wielding psycho, I decided to look at the doorbell box to investigate. The doorbell box is located on a wall in my living room. The cover to the box was missing when I moved in, so I was instantly able to see inside to all of the mechanics of the doorbell. I was shocked to realise that all of the wires to the doorbell had been completely disconnected and they were all hanging free. The only possible way to make the doorbell chime with the wires disconnected is to physically flick the hammer with your finger in order for it to ring the bell. In that moment, I realised that whatever made the doorbell ring didn't come from outside. It came from inside my apartment. Now that my mother and I were properly scared, we quickly finished dinner and she left for the night. I was now alone in the apartment and decided to watch some TV in order to get my mind off things. Everything was back to normal for about 20 minutes or so, and then I started hearing this strange noise behind me. I ignored it at first, not wanting to really know what was behind me after what I'd just experienced, but the noise grew louder and louder. I finally turned around and saw the hammer of the doorbell jerking up and down as if to try and make the bell ring again. As soon as my eyes met it, it abruptly stopped, as if it knew I'd caught it. This is not the first or last experience I've had in this apartment.
And thank you to Kaylee for sharing that story. And it really does sound like you've got quite a few more in store. So please do get in touch and share those with us. We'd really like to hear them.
Yeah, she's almost left us on a cliffhanger.
Indeed. I was so amused that her mum left straight away, though.
Oh, bless her. Obviously, she was very freaked out. But yes, it did strike me as funny that she said, now that we were properly scared, my mum left. And I was alone. Poor Kaylee.
Such an interesting story, though, especially obviously it's disconnected and there's no power to it and you have to physically touch it for it to go off, and it's happening. And it's happening a lot.
Well, to start with, I thought that this was almost like a residual noise. When she said that it was disconnected, but they were still hearing it, I thought, well, perhaps it's something that happened a lot in the past. That sounds bleeding through. But she actually saw the hammer of the doorbell moving. So that's not a residual sound. Something is actually making that bell ring, which is, I think that's all the more frightening somehow.
That is really strange. Okay, and back to the Christmas quiz. Remind me of your question again.
Okay, so my question was, Hurricane Florence this year sparked the re-emergence of a legendary ghost. Can you tell me what it was?
No.
I really thought you might know this one. Do you want a clue?
Okay, give me a clue.
So the legend is from South Carolina. Does that help?
No.
No? Okay. Well, savvy listeners will know that I'm talking about the Grey Man of Pawleys Island. The Grey Man has been part of South Carolina legend for 200 years, but is not thought to be a harbinger of doom. Rather, his appearance seems meant as a warning for residents to take the weather warnings seriously and evacuate before it's too late. Often reported to be a translucent figure all in grey, he appears on Pawleys Island before a hurricane. Often witnesses spot him walking along the shoreline, but at least one couple in the 1950s encountered him when he called at their front door and warned them that they needed to leave the island as a deadly storm was coming. They were surprised, as the weather showed no sign of an approaching storm, but they took the warning seriously, and as they looked on, the man in grey vanished before their eyes. Having heeded his warning, though, they were safely out of the way when Hurricane Hazel hit. The apparition's story varies from one legend to another, but one of the most popular is a tale of lost love, isn't it always? In this version, the Grey Man is a victim of a storm himself. The story goes that after an absence of many months, he's returning home to see the girl that he loved. But at his back, a dreadful storm was sweeping in. He tried to outrun it by taking a shortcut across wild marshland, but it was a risk too far, and the doomed man met his end in deadly quicksand. His sweetheart, mourning her lost love, took to wandering the lonely shores of the island, her cries of grief swallowed up by the crashing of the waves, her tears whipped away by a salty, stinging wind. One day, as she was making her mournful promenade, she spotted a figure on the shoreline. It looked just like her fiancé, but it couldn't be. Her grief must be playing tricks with her eyes. Suddenly, the figure issued a warning that she was in danger and must leave the island. Despite the shock and upset, she heeded his warning and left the island. In doing so, she escaped a devastating storm, which otherwise could very well have claimed her life too. Having saved one soul from the same fate as his own, it's said that he's continued to issue his ghostly warnings to islanders since the 1800s. The Grey Man is seen as a protective spirit, and it's thought that if you see him and heed his warning, your property will survive the storm unscathed. A witness who saw the Grey Man's warning appearance before Hurricane Hazel hit in 1954 was relieved when not only did her home survive intact, but the towels she'd hung up on her balcony were still in place. This seemed so incredible that many attributed it to the protective powers of the Grey Man. Apparently, he's been seen before every one of the 5 hurricanes that have hit the coast over the last 200 years, with the last sightings previously dating back to 1989 before Hurricane Hugo hit the area. But this September, as Hurricane Florence closed in on the island, reports of Grey Man sightings started hitting the headlines, with whole groups of people apparently witnessing the apparition and taking his warning very seriously indeed.
Now that you've told me the story, I do vaguely recollect this. I think a few people posted it on our Facebook group, didn't they?
Yes, they did. That's why I thought you'd recognise it.
Okay, I'm calling in my half a point for knowing the answer after you've told me it.
Okay. Well, yeah, why not?
There we go. The one thing that stuck out, though, was very much he protects people's houses who heed his warning and leave. Wouldn't it be more effective for him to protect the houses of the people that didn't leave?
Well, yeah, but you could say that they kind of brought it on themselves by not taking the warning seriously.
They can, but it's kind of like, you know, if you leave, then you needn't have left.
Oh, you're just hurting my brain now. Remind me what your quiz question was.
Okay, so our giantess friend from Iceland had a pet. I'll give you 1 point if you can tell me what the pet was, and another point if you can tell me what it did at Christmas time.
I want to say a cat, but I think that's... Oh, is that right? I was going to say I thought that might have been Freya.
No, it's the Yule cat.
Okay. And what it does at Christmas time?
Yeah.
Is it something to do with people who haven't cleaned their houses, or am I getting that mixed up with another legend again?
Yeah, it's not quite that. It is to do with people who haven't done something.
No, you're going to have to help me out here.
Okay, so Grilla had a pet cat, the Yule cat, got a bit peckish at Christmas, and was said to eat people that had not received any new clothes before Christmas Eve.
What?
So remember to thank your granny for that ugly jumper, as it may have just saved your life.
That's not a very fair situation.
No, bizarre as it seems, the story was apparently an incentive to farm workers to finish processing the autumn wool. Workers that assisted in this endeavour would be rewarded with new clothes, and those that didn't risked becoming cat food.
That is one weird legend.
They're brilliant, aren't they?
But we have had a sort of recent tradition that we didn't have as children, but apparently now kids get like a pair of new pyjamas on Christmas Eve. So it's almost like, you know, all these children getting new pairs of pyjamas on Christmas Eve will be fine. They're not going to get eaten by the Yule cat.
Apparently so. I've never heard of the pyjama thing. That's new on me. But yeah, it's obviously Yule cat protection.
Perhaps that's where it comes from, eh?
Indeed. So before we get on to this episode's rather Christmassy paranormal postcard, we've got just one more quiz question.
Okay, you ready for mine?
Yep.
Final one. Many a horror movie has come to our screens, along with tales of the filming being beset by real ghosts and hauntings. which 2018 cinema release claimed to have some supernatural visitors on set.
Okay, I shall think about that while you go through the paranormal postcard.
So, what have you got for me?
My final quiz question. An Icelandic tradition is for children to leave a shoe on their windowsill leading up to Christmas. Can you tell me why?
Right. No, not at the present.
Well, you can have a think about that while you read us our rather royal Christmassy paranormal postcard.
Okay, well, time to settle in by the fire then, while I read you a paranormal postcard from Sandringham. Love them or hate them, the royal family are a big part of British history, as are their various residences, one of which is the Queen's Sandringham estate in Norfolk, and it is to this country estate that the royals retire every Christmas, taking their whole family and entourage with them. And although there must doubtlessly be a good deal more pomp and circumstance than most of us would relish around our festive celebrations, a lot of the royals' Yuletide traditions will sound quite familiar to many of us. On Christmas Eve, they convene for a traditional 4 p.m. tea with sandwiches and cake, after which they exchange cheap joke presents. Post-Christmas morning church service, the Queen apparently indulges in a tot of gin before the traditional turkey dinner with Christmas pudding and crackers to pull at the table, which must lead one to wonder if Queenie goes as far as to don the cracker's paper crown, after which everybody dozes off over Stilton and Port. It all sounds rather cosily like a lot of my own childhood Christmases, but somewhat less cosy is the spooky guest who appears uninvited every Christmas. Although with hundreds of years of history, and not a few royals having met their end on the property, perhaps it's unsurprising that the country house has its fair share of ghost stories. Evidence has been found of a residence on the site of the current house from as early as the year 1296, and in fact the grounds of the 20,000-acre property have turned up prehistoric flint tools and the remains of a Roman villa, so Sandringham holds some pretty deep layers of history in its landscape. But the property didn't pass into royal ownership until 1862, when the estate was purchased as a country home for Queen Victoria's son, Albert Edward, Prince of Wales, so that the 21-year-old could have a private house away from London, where he could enjoy the countryside and have some respite from his royal duties from time to time. The building we see today isn't this original one, which, having become too small for the prince's growing family, was demolished and in 1870 replaced with a larger, grander, red brick Jacobean-style property. Apparently, the new house partly followed the plan of the old house, and I don't know whether it's this or the later additions such as a ballroom being tacked on, or maybe the rebuilding work that followed after a fire in 1891 caused significant damage. But to me, the house has a rather gloriously asymmetrical, higgledy-piggledy look about it, with jutting bay windows, ornamental gables like icing on a Christmas cake, turrets with domed roofs tipped with spikes pointing skywards, and multitudes of twisting chimneys sprouting from the rooftops. It looks every bit the eccentric British country character, and that's before you even get to the gentry who reside there. Of course, the Queen doesn't live here all year round, but retreats to her countryside home just in time for Christmas. It's said that she takes the matter of ghosts and hauntings quite seriously. And it's a good job too, because on Christmas Eve, the Sandringham spirit starts to make its presence known. The supernatural activity is apparently strongest in the second-floor servants' quarters, where it verges on being almost poltergeist in nature. Objects are moved around, blankets are pulled off beds, and in a rather unfestive spirit, Christmas cards are scattered off shelves and thrown around. The maids seem to have the worst time of it, experiencing the chilling sensation of something unseen breathing heavily down their necks. Apparently, the maids will pair up to work in certain parts of the old house because they're too terrified to remain there alone. Staff have reported phantom footsteps, lights turning themselves on and off, doors inexplicably opening and closing, and the terrible, wheezing sound of something breathing in and out. Of course, a rambling country mansion would be a bit of a letdown if it didn't have a haunted library, and Sandringham doesn't disappoint. The library is actually said to be one of the most haunted rooms of the house. In it is an old clock, kept for decorative purposes, as the internal mechanisms have long since broken. But from time to time, the hands of the clock can still be seen to somehow be moving on their own. In the 1980s, Prince Charles and his valet were searching for some old prints in the library when they both noticed a sudden drop in temperature and the uncomfortable feeling of someone looming behind them. Turning around, they found no one there, but that only made the sensation all the more chilling. According to reports, the prince exclaimed, "Crikey!" before both men beat a hasty retreat. A servant who once made the mistake of falling asleep in the library soon learned his lesson when he awoke to see books flying off the shelves of their own volition. And I bet that was the last time he tried to sneak a nap in that room. Maybe the most recent ghost is said to be that of one of the Queen's favourite stewards, who sadly passed away in 1995. A year after his death, a footman who entered the cellar at Sandringham House reported that he felt a supernatural presence and saw an apparition, none other than the deceased steward who had been such a favourite of the Queen. In fact, it's even rumoured that the Queen herself has seen the apparition of her much-beloved servant on the property. The main house isn't the only one with reported paranormal activity either. The estate has other, smaller houses on the grounds. Smaller being very much a relative term here. 2 of which were gifted to the Queen's grandsons at their respective marriages as wedding presents. And of course, both of these houses have their own ghost stories. When William and Kate were gifted Amer Hall as a wedding present, the British newspapers made much of the rumour that it's haunted by the ghost of St Henry Walpole. Walpole was born in Norfolk, but fled England in the 1500s to escape religious persecution. Unfortunately, he was eventually betrayed, captured and imprisoned, first at York Castle and then at the Tower of London, where he suffered horrific torture. In the end, he was convicted of high treason. His punishment, to be hung, drawn and quartered. Tradition has it that the Walpole family once owned the Sandringham estate, and that Henry's restless spirit returned home to Norfolk and can be seen in the gardens of Amer Hall. Rather lyrically, the legend goes that when the Norfolk winds blow, you can hear him calling. It's an interesting tale, but I must admit I struggled to find any evidence that Walpole had ever lived on the Sandringham estate. But then estate boundaries move and change and aren't always written up well in the historical record. Whatever the truth behind the legend, the royal couple were apparently totally unfazed by the idea of sharing their house with a phantom, and commented, "No old home would be complete without its ghost." The tabloids tried very hard to hit the headlines with yet more haunting tales when another of Sandringham's properties was gifted to Harry and Meghan at their recent wedding, this time York Cottage, which I must say couldn't look less like a cottage if it tried. You could fit our house in there about 12 times. But this time, however, there really wasn't much to go on, and all the supposed hauntings seemed to be largely down to the fact that a couple of royals over the years had called the house a bit gloomy, so I think we'll leave that one well alone. But to head back to the big house for a moment, there are a couple of less well-reported incidents from guests who had strange experiences while visiting Sandringham. One female guest awoke in the middle of the night to a brightly lit room. Perplexed, she then watched as a young boy carrying a long pole entered the room and proceeded deliberately around each wall in turn, reaching up with the pole every few feet, as though to extinguish candles that were long since gone. The Duke of Edinburgh's uncle, Prince Christopher of Greece, was staying at Sandringham one evening when he glanced up from his book and spotted something eerie in his dressing table mirror. Although there was no one else in the room, he could see the reflection of a sad-looking lady wearing a mask. Despite the mask, certain details about the woman's hair and dress were clear enough for him to commit to memory before the image vanished. But the twist came when he was visiting another grand Norfolk country house, this time Houghton Hall, only a few miles from Sandringham. Whilst there, he identified the mysterious apparition from a portrait hanging at Houghton Hall. In the portrait, the lady was wearing the very same ball gown and mask that he'd seen on the apparition. The portrait was of a young Lady Dorothy Walpole, who had grown up at Houghton Hall. Now this is where it gets a bit weird, and we could go down a little bit of a rabbit hole. Have you heard of the Brown Lady of Rainham Hall?
It certainly rings a bell, and I know it's one of the most famous pictures, isn't it? But
yes.
I just can't bring it to mind. Is it the one that looks like not the face is hooded on the stairs?
Yes, it's the one on the stairs.
Oh, it is that one?
It's that photograph, that very same photograph, yes.
Then yes, I'm aware of the Brown Lady.
So Rainham Hall is yet another grand country house in Norfolk. They do seem to have plenty of them. In fact, all three, Sandringham, Houghton and Rainham, are within just a few miles of each other and almost form a neat line of travel heading towards the east coast. But as Fitz says, the Brown Lady of Rainham Hall is probably one of the most famous ghost photographs around. If you Google ghost photographs, it will come up amongst the images. It was taken in December of 1936 by photographers of Country Life magazine who'd been taking pictures of the hall. They had their cameras set up and ready to shoot the next series of photographs when they saw an apparition appear on the stairs. By virtue of some quick thinking, they then managed to actually capture the apparition on film. Of course, the photograph caused quite a stir when it was published in the Country Life magazine, but the Brown Lady ghost, as she was known, had been spotted by members of the household and visitors to the hall for over 100 years. And many of these witnesses were able to identify the apparition from a portrait which hung at Rainham Hall. The portrait was of none other than Lady Dorothy Walpole. According to legend, she was imprisoned at Rainham Hall by her husband after he discovered she was having an affair, and she's said to have remained at Rainham Hall until her death from smallpox in 1726.
See, this is interesting because we've spoken before about other ghosts that have been seen either in multiple locations or in different areas around the same location.
Yeah.
And she's obviously appearing in multiple locations.
Yep.
But in the same dress.
Yes.
Because there was the one which was in Northampton somewhere where you saw the lady at two different ages.
That's right. Oh, yeah. That was Delaprey, I think, was it? Where you saw the lady as a young woman and then as an older woman. Yes, I've forgotten about that. No, I don't. It doesn't say that she's seen in the ball gown at Rainham Hall. Now, at Rainham Hall, she appears as this brown lady, as you see in the photograph, which is like you said, sort of cloaked, almost wearing a kind of a cape with a hood. It was only at Sandringham where she appeared in the ball gown with the mask, which is how she is in the portrait at Houghton. There's so many houses involved, it's really confusing. So to sum up, she was seen at Sandringham, but nobody knows why because she never lived there. She grew up at Houghton Hall, which is where She was identified from a portrait of her in the ball gown, but as far as I'm aware, she's not seen there as a ghost. But she was kept and died at Raynham Hall, where she appears as a ghost, but seemingly, like you say, possibly a different age or a different version of her.
So presumably the fact that she's wearing a ball gown would lead you to believe that she was perhaps going to a ball at Sandringham.
Well,
it doesn't seem out of the question that one might go to a ball at Sandringham.
No, this is the thing. Yes, the reports say, well, she never lived there. But as you quite rightly say, gentry of that time would have had balls and events, and she would have dressed up to go to them. And maybe that was just a really happy time. Well, maybe not a really happy time. It could have been a really great night that she wanted to relive. It might have been a really traumatic night that she kept reliving. Who knows? But yeah, with the proximity of the halls, they're only a few miles away, it's completely feasible that she went to visit there and would have been all dressed up for the occasion.
Well, if we ever get a chance to meet the Queen, we'll ask if she can find out.
I'm sure she'll be right on the case. Unfortunately, we weren't able to visit Sandringham House to see it in all its Christmas splendour because it's closed for the season at the moment. Although I have many happy memories of visiting the Sandringham estate, by which I mean just the outdoor bits, as a child. The acres of woods are the perfect spot to stop off and have a picnic when you're travelling to the east coast for a day at the seaside. Also, my intrepid mum had us all convinced, largely I think because she's very sceptical of beachside public loos. And where else are you going to find posher toilets for your loo break than on the Queen's estate?
Do you know what the favourite bit of that story was for me?
What?
The bit with Prince Charles.
Going, crikey!
That's so brilliant.
I read that in one report and I had to include it.
So British. Crikey.
I'm sure they soon recovered over tea and crumpets.
Indeed. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that festive paranormal postcard, and we are coming rapidly up to the end of the show, but before we get there, we've got to finish up the Christmas quiz.
Mm-hmm. So do you have an answer for me? Can you even remember the question?
I can't remember the question. It reminds me.
Which 2018 cinema release claimed to have some supernatural visitors on set?
Oh God, all of them? I don't know.
Think about which horror movies have come out this year.
I don't watch horror movies, so I don't know.
Oh, okay. Well, it was The Nun, the latest offering in the Conjuring franchise, the series of movies supposedly very loosely based on the misadventures of the Warrens.
Very loosely based.
Very loosely. But Warrenology aside, The Nun's director, Corin Hardy, was surprised to encounter some real paranormal events on set, despite having the production blessed by an Eastern Orthodox priest. Apparently the crew got a bit spooked when they found a mysterious handprint in the dust while they were filming at Corvin Castle in Transylvania. But it was later that the director had his own first-hand paranormal encounter. Whilst shooting a scene in what was known on set as the Corridor of Crosses, the crew were utilising a 200-foot-long, dark, dank tunnel in the bowels of an old Romanian fortress, which had previously been used to store weapons. Hardy needed to be out of shot of the cameras, so he tucked himself away into a small, dark cell that opened immediately off the long corridor. As he entered, he spotted a couple of crew members at the back of the room. He said hi, thinking they were sound guys, and didn't think much of not getting a reply, as some of the crew were Romanian. If he thought about it at all, he would have guessed it was down to a language barrier. But really, he was focused on getting the tricky shot he needed. It took a good half an hour to get it right, and it was difficult. So when they finally nailed it, he turned round to share his delight with the crew members. He asked them, "Did you see that?" But the room was empty. There was no way out of the room except past Hardy himself, which could only mean there was never anybody in the room to begin with. But Hardy knew what he'd seen, and he was convinced he'd felt them there behind him the whole time. Far from being terrified, however, he took the opinion that his phantom visitors were merely curious about what was going on, and supposed that they might be spirits of dead soldiers who had once worked in the fortress.
Ooh, it's a good one. I must admit, my first thought was that they were just trying to hype the film.
Well, yes, as was mine. But I watched the director actually relate this in a couple of videos, and he did seem genuine. I think it's different when you're watching somebody tell it themselves, especially if you watch it more than once.
Yeah. Like, if it was just like, oh, some creepy things happened and some people saw a shadowy figure, I'd be like, they're just trying to hype the film.
Yeah.
But there was enough detail that if it was, they put some effort into it.
Yeah. And often I think you find that when they're trying to hype a film, you get little snippets from sort of everywhere. They kind of tuck bits in here and there. This was really just one guy that had a personal experience and related it seemingly quite honestly.
Interesting. Well, that was another fail for me.
Well, I can't even remember your question, but I'm pretty sure I didn't know the answer.
I'll give you a hint. I think you'll twig fairly quickly.
Okay, what was the question to begin with?
So, an Icelandic tradition is for children to leave a shoe on their windowsill leading up to Christmas. Can you tell me why?
I really want to say, to get filled with gifts, but...
Yep, that's it.
Is that...
That's basically it.
I got a whole point.
You did.
It's a Christmas miracle.
There's a little bit more to it than that, but it is basically like children's stockings by the fireside sort of thing. But it is, once again, to do with our friend Gorilla.
Okay.
Now, originally, there were what's called the Yule Lads, which was sort of, originally they were quite nasty sort of
I'm not
things.
surprised, bearing in mind the other folklore.
Yeah, some descriptions had them as homicidal monsters that ate children, but now they're kind of more mischievous pranksters.
Okay.
And they've been sort of tied into the Gorilla legend, so they're now Gorilla's children.
Right.
And they come to children in the days leading up to Christmas. And if they've been good, they get a toy in their shoe. And if they've been bad, I'll give you a bonus point if you can tell me what it is that happens in their shoe if they've been bad.
That happens in their shoe?
No,
I mean, that conjures up some images.
Yeah, that would conjure up the wrong image. No, what is placed in their shoe if they've been bad?
Coal?
No, good guess. Rotting potatoes.
Oh, well, that was a surprise. I thought it was going to be something worse, to be honest.
No, I must admit, the way I phrased it, I could understand how you would think that. No, didn't come off well. But yeah, so it's basically if they're good, they're rewarded with gifts sort of every night leading up to Christmas. They sort of check it in the morning and see what's there. So it's a way of Scandinavian parents being like, okay, you were good yesterday, so you get a toy. And then you got overexcited and stayed up till 3 a.m, so now you've got a potato.
A rotting
your
potato.
ideas up or you won't be getting anything nice for Christmas.
Fair enough.
I'm not sure who's won. I
haven't got a clue. I lost track of the score back in the number 1.
Right, okay, listeners. What you're going to have to do, we'll take it on an amalgamated thing. So email us, Facebook us, tweet us, Instagram, what have you.
Who do you think won?
Who do you think won?
Did you manage to score yourselves? I would love to know.
Yeah. So if you think I won, just get in touch and say Fitz won. If you think Lil won, let us know. And let us know what you scored as well.
Yeah, let us know your scores. I bet there are so many people out there that did way better than us.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Now, we like to end our Christmas show with the literal bang as we pull our crackers and don our paper hats. But just before we get even more silly than we already have been, we just want to say a massive thank you to everybody that's listened, shared stories, shared the show, and supported us over the whole of this year. Thank you so much, guys. We couldn't do it without you. And now, on with the crackers.
Oh, she won them both.
I'll give you it back. I'm feeling generous as long as you put your hat on.
I don't think it fits over my giant head.
It may not fit over your sound mixing headphones. Well, I've got my hat on. Have you got a joke?
I've got a little plastic angel.
How terribly fitting.
I don't think I've got a joke.
Oh, no.
What kind of...
It's hard. disaster.
ridiculousness is this? Oh no, I found it.
Oh, I had to struggle to find mine as well. Okay. You go first.
What does Santa like to eat?
I don't know.
A jolly roll.
That doesn't even make sense. That's so bad.
I'm not sure it does make sense, no.
Okay. Why did the gingerbread man go to the doctors?
I don't know. Why did the gingerbread man go to the doctors?
Because he felt crummy. Wow, these are awesomely terrible.
They are tragic. Although that is the point of the cracker joke. Oh my word. Right, well, I don't think this crown is going to fit even if I did take off my headset. So I think we're going to have to call it a day there. We hope you have a fantastic festive season and a happy new year, and that you'll join us in 2019 for more Knock Once for Yes.